Mind telling me how you afford something like this?
Officer, am I being detained for a specific reason?
Step back toward the sidewalk. I'm going to take a quick look.
You have it.
Vehicle matches the description.
So what report number?
He was driving within the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, music low, suit pressed. Not a single reason in the world to be pulled over. But Officer Dale Pruitt didn't see a law-abiding citizen. He didn't see a professional. He didn't see a man who had spent 26 years protecting communities just like this one. He saw a black man in a black Bentley, and in his mind, that was more than enough. What followed was 17 minutes of humiliation, an illegal search conducted without consent or probable cause, a string of condescending remarks caught on 2 cameras, and a power trip so staggeringly arrogant that it would unravel an entire career before the sun went down. Because the man in that Bentley wasn't just any citizen passing through Harlow City. He was the department's newly sworn-in police chief, and this was his very first morning on the job. And Officer Dale Pruitt had absolutely no idea who he had just stopped. Not yet. Before we dive deeper into this absolutely shocking story, hit that subscribe button if you believe in holding authority figures accountable when they abuse their power. Marcus Calloway did not grow up with privilege. He grew up in the east side of Harlow City, in a neighborhood where sirens were the background music of childhood, and where his grandmother told him every single morning to speak clearly, move slowly around police, and never give anyone a reason to fear him, even though he had never done a single thing wrong. He carried those words through 26 years in law enforcement, through patrol shifts in high-crime districts, to a detective role that cracked 3 cold cases in 2 years, to a federal task force partnership that made regional news, to a leadership position at a mid-sized department 2 states over. And then the call that changed everything. Harlow City's mayor personally recruited Marcus to become the department's new police chief, the first black chief in the city's 97-year history. On the morning of his first official day, Marcus woke at 4:45 a.m., made his own breakfast, drove his personal vehicle, a black Bentley Flying Spur he had saved for nearly a decade, and headed toward the building that was now his to lead. But Marcus never made it to the front door without incident. What happened 3 blocks from the station that morning would shake the entire city to its core. Marcus noticed the patrol car at 2 traffic lights from the department. He knew the pattern, the way a musician knows a chord, immediately, instinctively, and without any doubt. The slow follow, the deliberate pacing, the way the cruiser shadowed every lane change without closing in. He had run that same pattern himself as a young officer, and he had spent years training people to recognize why it was wrong when done without cause. He kept both hands on the wheel, visible, maintained 5 miles under the speed limit, used his turn signal generously, did everything right the way black men in this country learn to do everything right, not because the law requires it, but because survival sometimes does. When the blue lights lit up the rearview mirror, Marcus pulled over immediately, smoothly, completely. He chose a well-lit stretch of road near a barber shop with a large front window and an outdoor security camera mounted above the entrance. He noticed the camera. He said nothing about it. He rolled down his window and placed both hands on top of the steering wheel. What Officer Dale Pruitt said within the first 30 seconds of approaching that window was so deliberately demeaning that even seasoned officers who later reviewed the footage said they were ashamed to wear the same uniform. Officer Dale Pruitt had been with the Harlow City Police Department for 9 years. In those 9 years, he had accumulated 11 complaints, 8 of which involved black or Latino male drivers. None had resulted in formal discipline. He had a reputation inside the department that some officers quietly described as a problem we keep kicking down the road. He leaned into Marcus's window, looked slowly around the interior of the Bentley, and then looked at Marcus the way someone looks at a painting they think is a forgery. "Cars like this don't come from around here," he said. Marcus kept his voice completely steady. "Good morning, officer. Can I ask the reason for the stop?" Pruitt said, "The vehicle matched the description of a car flagged in connection with a theft in the area." Marcus asked for the report number. Pruitt said he would have to check his system. He never checked. Instead, without stating probable cause and without requesting consent, he told Marcus to step out of the vehicle. Marcus stepped out, slowly, hands visible at all times. He was wearing a charcoal gray Hugo Boss suit. His new department ID was in his breast pocket. His signed appointment letter from the mayor was in the center console. He said nothing about either. Not yet. Because Marcus Calloway has spent 26 years learning the precise moment to speak and the precise moment to simply let a person expose every inch of themselves. Officer Pruitt was doing an extraordinary job of the second option. Without asking for consent, without stating probable cause, without a warrant, Officer Pruitt opened the passenger door of the Bentley and began searching the vehicle. This was a clear, textbook violation of the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, the right against unreasonable search and seizure, a right that exists for every citizen regardless of the car they drive or the color of their skin, a right that Pruitt had been trained on, a right he chose in that moment to completely disregard. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, hands clasped in front of him, and watched. Pruitt opened the glove compartment. Inside was the appointment letter, official city letterhead, the mayor's signature, and the title Chief of Police, Harlow City Police Department, printed in clean, formal type directly below Marcus's full name. Pruitt picked it up, read it, placed it back down, and kept searching. 3 stores down, a woman named Cheryl O'Coffer was unlocking her hair salon for the morning. She had seen this kind of stop before. Her nephew had been through 2 of them. She pulled out her phone and pressed record. What Cheryl captured on that phone in the next 4 minutes would be viewed by millions before the day was over. But Cheryl was not the only person recording, and the second camera would reveal something even more damning. The barbershop security camera had been installed 6 months earlier after a string of break-ins on the block. It faced outward at a wide angle, covering the full sidewalk and the street in front, including the precise stretch of road where Marcus's Bentley was parked. The shop owner, Mr. Jerome Masante, arrived at 7:30 a.m. and immediately noticed the stop. He went inside, checked his system, confirmed the camera was recording and saving to the cloud, and watched through his window without interfering. On the street, Pruitt had moved to the back seat. He checked under the seats. He opened the center console where the appointment letter sat. He checked the trunk. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. There had never been anything. He returned to Marcus, adjusted his belt casually, and said, "Looks like you're good. Have a nice day." 5 words, breezy, unbothered, the words of a man who had done this many times and had never once faced a consequence that changed his behavior. Marcus looked at him for a measured moment and said, "I need your name and badge number, please." Pruitt recited them with the energy of someone deeply unbothered. Badge 318, Officer Dale Pruitt. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Hope your day gets better, buddy." The word buddy, casual, dismissive, deliberate, was caught on both cameras in perfect clarity, and that single word would become the most discussed detail in a story that was already writing itself. Marcus watched Pruitt's cruiser pull away. He stood on the sidewalk for 87 seconds. He was not shaking with rage. He was not in tears. He was doing exactly what he had trained himself to do in the highest pressure moments of his career, breathing slowly, thinking with precision, and deciding his next move with the calm of a man who understood that how you respond to injustice matters as much as the injustice itself. He got back in his Bentley, drove the remaining 3 miles to the Harlow City Police Department. He pulled into the parking lot and drove to the section marked Reserved, Office of the Chief of Police. His name had been painted on the space that very morning in fresh white letters. He parked, straightened his jacket, and walked through the front doors. The desk sergeant, a 23-year veteran who had been telling colleagues all week how excited she was about the new chief, looked up and immediately stood. "Chief Calloway, good morning, sir. Welcome home." 3 offices down, having returned by a different route, Officer Dale Pruitt was pouring his second coffee of the morning. He heard the words, "Chief Calloway." He turned around. The coffee stopped halfway to his mouth, and the expression on Dale Pruitt's face at that precise moment was one everyone present said they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Pruitt stood completely still. The man from the Bentley, the man whose car he had searched without cause, whose rights he had violated without hesitation, whom he had called Buddy, was standing at the front desk in a Hugo Boss suit, shaking hands with Sergeant Sims, smiling at 2 junior officers who had lined up to introduce themselves. Marcus glanced once in Pruitt's direction, not with fury, not with triumph, with the quiet, steady recognition of a man who had seen this moment coming from 3 miles away and had let it arrive entirely on its own. Then he turned back to Sergeant Sims, asked for a brief tour before the noon ceremony, and walked down the hall with the posture of someone who had earned every step. Pruitt set his coffee on the counter. He did not drink it. He walked to his locker room, sat down on a bench, and stared at the floor. His colleague, Officer Brent Osai, came in 2 minutes later, took one look at him, said nothing, sat down beside him. Brent had filed 2 internal complaints in 3 years about Pruitt's behavior. Both had gone nowhere. He looked at Pruitt's face and thought quietly that something had finally shifted. But neither of them knew yet that 2 videos already existed, that one of them was uploading to the internet at that very moment, and that within 90 minutes, Harlow City was about to become national news. Cheryl Okafor had uploaded her video to her neighborhood Facebook group at 7:51 a.m. with one simple caption: "This is what happens every morning on our street. Enough." By 8:30, it had been shared 400 times. By 9 a.m., Mr. Asante's barbershop camera footage had been requested by a local news producer and was being reviewed in an edit suite across town. By 9:45, 75 minutes before Marcus Calloway's formal introduction ceremony, both videos were live on 3 different news platforms under variations of the same headline: "New Harlow City Police Chief racially profiled on his first day to work." Cheryl's video showed the stop, the search, and the dismissal. Mr. Asante's footage showed everything in a wider frame, including the clear view of the police department building visible in the background just 3 blocks down the road. In the department bullpen, officers were watching it on their phones in clusters of 2 and 3. Nobody was laughing. The room had the very specific silence of people who understand that something irreversible has happened. Lieutenant Diana Walsh, head of internal affairs, had already printed the complaint form before anyone came to find her. And then, at 10:02 a.m., the call came down from the deputy chief's office with 4 words that stopped every conversation in the building: "Pruitt, upstairs, right now." Deputy Chief Yvonne Marshall had spent 20 years in law enforcement. She was methodical, precise, and allergic to excuses dressed up as explanations. She placed her laptop on the conference table. Both videos played side by side. She let them run completely. Then she closed the laptop and asked Pruitt one question: was there a theft report connected to that vehicle? Pruitt sat across from her in full uniform. He had requested his union rep, who sat to his left, saying nothing. There was a pause that lasted slightly too long. "No," Pruitt said. Deputy Chief Marshall nodded slowly. So there was no legal basis for the stop, no probable cause for the search, no lawful justification for asking him to exit the vehicle. And you read his appointment letter in that glove compartment and continued searching anyway. Pruitt said nothing. 9 years, Dale, she said quietly. 11 complaints, and you did this 3 blocks from the station on his first morning. Pruitt's union rep shifted in his seat. What Pruitt said next, the explanation he offered, the actual words he chose, stunned even Deputy Chief Marshall, who had been in this building long enough to think nothing could surprise her anymore. Pruitt leaned forward slightly and said, "A car like that in that part of the route stood out. I used my professional instinct." Deputy Chief Marshal looked at him for a long moment. "Your professional instinct," she repeated. "The profile of the driver didn't match the vehicle," he said, and then, as if this clarified things rather than destroyed them, "That's just pattern recognition." The union rep closed his eyes. Marshall spoke quietly but with complete precision. She told Pruitt that the profile of the driver didn't match the vehicle was not a legal standard, a departmental policy, or a legitimate basis for any police action in any jurisdiction in the United States. She told him it was a clear, documented, and now internationally visible bias, and that describing it as pattern recognition did not change what it was, it only confirmed it. She told him that as of that moment, he was suspended with pay pending a full internal affairs investigation, that his badge and weapon were to be surrendered before he left the building, and that the matter was being referred simultaneously to the city's Civil Rights Division and the State Oversight Board. Pruitt said he wanted to speak to a lawyer. Marshall said that was absolutely his right. But what nobody in that room had been told yet was that Chief Marcus Calloway had already sent a message to Deputy Chief Marshal's office that morning, and what that message said would redirect the entire course of what happened next. At noon, the Harlow City Police Department held its formal swearing-in ceremony for Chief Marcus Calloway. The mayor was present, city council members, department leadership, local and national press, more press than had been planned for because by noon the story had spread beyond Harlow City and journalists were flying in. Every officer in the building attended, including Officer Brent Osai, who sat in the second row and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in 3 years. Marcus stood at the podium in full dress uniform, the 4 stars on his collar catching the light, and looked out at the room with the unhurried composure of a man who had earned every element of this moment, including the painful, public one that had preceded it by 5 hours. He spoke for 14 minutes. He talked about his grandmother's instructions, about growing up 2 miles from this building, about the officer's badge being a promise to a community, not a permission slip over it, about what accountability actually looks like when it is practiced rather than performed. He did not name Pruitt. He did not need to. But at the very end of his speech, Marcus said one thing that nobody, not the deputy chief, not the mayor, not a single journalist in the room had anticipated, and it changed everything that followed. Marcus paused at the end of his prepared remarks. He looked down briefly, then back up. "I want to say one thing clearly," he said. "What happened to me this morning has happened to men and women in this city who had no badge to fall back on, no title, no ceremony waiting for them at noon. What happened to me this morning was not exceptional. It was ordinary. That is the entire point." He paused again. "My position did not make what happened to me wrong. It was already wrong. I just happened to be in a position where it couldn't be quietly filed away. And I'm going to spend every day in this role making sure that the people of this city, all of them, have the same protection from that kind of wrong that my badge gave me today." The room rose. Not a polite ceremonial rise, a full, spontaneous standing ovation that started in the back row and moved forward like a wave of officers, officials, and press, all on their feet, some of them visibly emotional. Outside the building, a crowd of community members who had gathered after seeing the videos online heard the applause through the open doors. But Marcus had one more announcement, and when he made it, the department would never operate the same way again. Effective immediately, Chief Calloway announced 4 operational changes. 1. Every traffic stop in Harlow City would now require the officer to log a specific, articulable legal reason for the stop before exiting their vehicle, time-stamped automatically in the department system. 2. Any search of a private vehicle required either a signed consent form completed before the search or documented probable cause reviewed by a supervisor within 24 hours. 3. All body and dash camera footage from any stop resulting in a complaint would be reviewed and a response provided to the complaining citizen within 48 hours. 4. Any officer with more than 3 unresolved complaints of racial bias within a 5-year period would be subject to mandatory retraining and an automatic supervisory review of their recent stops. Policy 4 was not standard anywhere. Marcus had written it the previous night before he had even driven to the station, as if he knew. The press typed furiously. The union rep made 3 phone calls in 5 minutes, and in the back of the room, a young black officer named Damon Fielding sat up straighter than he had since joining the department because he had been waiting for a reason to open a file he had been keeping for 2 years. And what was in that file would transform this story from one bad stop on one morning into the exposure of something the department had been hiding for a long time. Damon Fielding was 29 years old and had been with the department for 2.5 years. In that time, he had kept personal log, dates, badge numbers, descriptions of stops he had witnessed or been instructed to participate in that had no legal justification. Overheard conversations in the locker room, a sergeant who had told him on his 3rd week that he needed to learn how things work here before trying to change them. A specific incident in which dashcam footage was reported as technically corrupted on the same day within the same hour that a formal racial profiling complaint arrived at the front desk. He had kept the file because he was 29, because he had student loans, because he had watched what happened to officers who spoke before anyone was listening. Someone was listening. Damon knocked on Marcus Calloway's office door at 4:15 p.m. on his first day. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk and said, "I've been waiting to give this to the right person for 2 years. I think you're him." Marcus looked at the envelope, then at Damon. Then he picked it up and said simply, "Thank you." This took real courage. Damon nodded. His hands were shaking slightly. What was in that envelope would expand this story far beyond one rogue officer and one illegal traffic stop, and what it revealed about the department's history would make national headlines within 72 hours. Damon's file documented 21 incidents over 2 years involving 7 different officers conducting stops that had no articulable legal basis, all in the city's predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods on the east and south sides. It included records of 4 complaints that had been filed by citizens and logged as resolved, with no investigation notes attached. It included the name of a supervising sergeant who had been present during 2 of the stops and had signed off on both reports with no mention of the Fourth Amendment issues Damon had flagged internally. And it included a detailed account of a dash cam footage file that had been reported corrupted on the same day, within the same hour that a formal racial profiling complaint arrived at the front desk. Marcus spent that evening reading every page. He requested an independent investigator from the state attorney's office the following morning. By the end of the first week, the investigation had expanded into a full 3-year audit of the department's stop and search records. What the auditors found was a 310% higher rate of searches conducted on Black and Latino drivers compared to white drivers in comparable neighborhood conditions, with a contraband find rate of under 5%. The city council called an emergency session. And when the community found out what that session was about, what happened outside City Hall that evening was something this city had not seen in a generation. The emergency session was supposed to be internal. By the time it began, there were over 500 people on the steps outside. Not a riot, not a disorder. People standing with printed photographs of family members who had been stopped without cause, parents holding children's hands, elderly residents in folding chairs brought from home, a man in his 60s holding a handwritten sign that simply read, "We have been saying this for years." Inside, the mayor announced a full civil rights audit of the department, publicly funded and publicly reported within 90 days. She announced the immediate suspension of the 7 officers identified in Damon's documentation, pending investigation. She announced a community oversight board, not advisory, but with genuine authority to subpoena records and recommend termination. She announced that Officer Dale Pruitt had been formally charged with misconduct, civil rights violation under the Fourth Amendment, and filing a false basis for a stop, the non-existent theft report he had cited and never produced. When the announcements were read aloud by someone on the steps outside through a phone speaker, the crowd did not erupt in chaos. They exhaled. The long, collective exhale of people who had been told for years that they were imagining things and had just been told by their own city that they were not. But there was one final encounter still to come, one moment between Marcus Calloway and Dale Pruitt that nobody had scheduled, nobody had engineered, and nobody who witnessed it would ever forget. 4 days before his formal disciplinary hearing, Officer Dale Pruitt submitted a written request to Chief Calloway's office. He asked for 10 minutes, in person, no record. Every person Marcus consulted told him he had no obligation to agree. His own attorney told him it was unadvisable. Marcus agreed anyway. They sat in a small conference room at the end of the corridor. No recording, no witnesses. Pruitt came in, sat down, folded his hands on the table, and for a long time said nothing at all. Then he said, "I knew what I was doing when I turned those lights on. Not who you were, but what I was doing. And I have been calling it instinct for 9 years because instinct sounds better than what it actually is." Marcus waited. "I'm not asking you to fix this for me," Pruitt said. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed to say it to your face, because you're the first person I've ever had to say it to." Marcus looked at him steadily. "I hear you," he said, "and I want you to understand that whatever I feel about what happened, my forgiveness is separate from this process. This process has to do what it has to do regardless of what's between us as 2 men. Those are not the same thing." Pruitt nodded. He stood. He left. What Marcus did at Pruitt's formal disciplinary hearing, the specific action he took that stunned the review board and made headlines of its own, is the part of this story that nobody saw coming. At the formal disciplinary hearing, the review board recommended termination and referral to the state for potential decertification and the permanent revocation of Pruitt's ability to serve in law enforcement. The evidence supported it entirely. The recommendation was sound. And then the board noted that Chief Calloway had submitted a personal letter. In it, Marcus did not argue against the termination. He supported it, but he asked that decertification include a structured pathway back to public service, not law enforcement, but community service of another kind, contingent on the completion of a rigorous accountability and bias program, sustained for a minimum of 2 years with results independently verified. He wrote, "I am not interested in destroying one man while the systems that enabled him for 9 years face no equivalent reckoning. Accountability without the possibility of redemption is not justice. It is just punishment with better branding. I want the punishment. I also want reform, both, without compromise on either." The board approved the recommendation with the pathway included. 3 members said afterward it was the most thoughtful submission they had received in years of disciplinary proceedings. And 6 months later, in the most unexpected development of this entire story, something happened that brought Marcus Calloway and the city of Harlow City full circle in a way that moved even the most hardened observers. 6 months after that Monday morning stop, the city of Harlow City installed the first of 12 planned community trust stations, small staffed neighborhood resource centers designed to rebuild the relationship between the department and the communities it had failed. The first one opened on the same block where Marcus had been stopped, 3 doors down from Mr. Asante's barbershop, across the street where Cheryl Okafor pressed record. Mr. Asante was at the opening, so was Cheryl, so was Damon Fielding in his uniform, standing straighter than he had in years. So were dozens of East Side residents, people who had filed complaints that went nowhere, people who had been stopped without cause and had nobody listen, people who had been right all along. Marcus stood at the small outdoor podium on that corner, the exact spot where he had stood with his hands clasped, watching his car be searched without cause on the first morning of a job he had spent a lifetime earning, and spoke for 5 minutes. He said, "Nothing that happened to me here was special. It was ordinary, and ordinary wrongs, faced with consistent courage, become the history of how things finally changed." He shook Mr. Asante's hand. He shook Cheryl's hand last and held it a moment longer than the rest. Then Marcus Calloway got back into his black Bentley, parked legally, and drove to work. If this story moved you, if it made you believe accountability with humanity is possible, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Rollins Justice for more real stories where the truth wins. Drop a comment below. Did Marcus handle Pruitt with too much grace, or is that exactly the leadership this country is starving for? Let's talk.